Prepare yourselves for the arrival.
The Collector base had been destroyed, humanity saved, and the Reapers delayed. With all their shortcuts and backup plans gone, the Reapers were forced to enter the galaxy through their standard FTL drives. However, Shepard would be unable to help shape events any further to prepare for the Reapers. The cost of destroying the Alpha Relay forced her to return to Earth to answer for it, in the hope of preventing tensions between humanity and the Praetorians from escalating. Fortunately, either before or after she was recalled to Earth, the various Squadmates Shepard had gathered to help defeat the Collectors had gone their separate ways, and, while some simply returned to the types of lives they had lived prior to meeting Shepard, for better or worse, most began making up for past mistakes or preparing for the inevitable. The most significant of these were Tali Zora, who returned to the Quarians and were promoted to the Admiralty Board, Legion, who returned to the Geth Consensus, where its experiences immediately verified that the Reapers were on their way, and Garrus Vicarian, who received a token task force to prepare for the Reapers and was able to encourage the Taurian hierarchy to reinforce technologies and logistics, where change would aid any conflict such as communications and resource reserves. However, they were not the only ones anticipating the conflict with the Reapers, and Cerberus were able to make much more effective use of the time. Although the base itself had been devastated by Shepard's actions, Cerberus teams sent through the Omega-4 relay salvaged anything they could from the remains of the space station, which were then passed to scientists working non-stop to find uses for the Reaper tech they found. For the sake of securing the Collector base and the connecting mass relay, Cerberus set up a plan to take control over Omega. Using the cover of an outbreak of adjutants, husk-like creatures that carried something akin to a conventional zombie virus, to ally with Aria T'Loak and draw her away by faking a retreat, they took her absence as the opportunity to take their target. Once she had been cast out from her own station, Aria initially attempted to retake it and form a short-lived resistance, but was forced to drift across the galaxy or witness the destruction of Omega. Eventually, she ended up at the Citadel roughly 3 weeks before the Reapers started their war in earnest, where she almost immediately set about plotting her revenge, but it would be months before she could be able to return to Omega. Elsewhere, the Illusive man began to direct resources to the establishment of Sanctuary on the colony horizon, ensuring it was already complete and ready for its dark purpose before the Reapers arrived at the galaxy. Restarting experiments on husks and other forms of Reaper tech, using data gathered from subjecting a former Cerberus agent to indoctrination as a starting point. Along with this, they also began rapidly expanding their numbers, using repurposed Reaper tech to enhance and better control their troops, but ignoring reports suggesting that indoctrination was already beginning to influence them. This shocking display of ignorance was in full force to the extent that the Illusive man subjected himself to the same implants after the breakthrough at Sanctuary towards the end of the Reaper War. While Cerberus's expansion did not go unnoticed by the other species, it would be largely unaddressed by them as the Reapers neared the galaxy. Knowing the location of the Shadow Broker base, Cerberus also attempted to seize it from Liara T'Soni, who, after she and Shepard had defeated the previous Shadow Broker, had been attempting to use the resources of the base to find a way to stop the Reapers. Although Cerberus was unsuccessful, they still continued to encounter Liara during her quest, one which saw her visit Prothean sites across the galaxy. As the Reapers grew ever closer, she requested Hackett provide her with a place at the Prothean archives on Mars to aid her efforts. Unbeknownst to any involved, Cerberus had also managed to find their way to the Prothean archives with an agent being placed there of their own.
How long do we have?
Not long. I sent word. The fleet's immobilizing.
God help us all.
When the Reapers began to enter the galaxy, they first did so through the distant systems of the Kite's Nest cluster. Starting in the Valar system, they rapidly crossed the distance to the Batarian home system. The isolated nature of the Batarian hegemony meant that the Reapers were able to hide their presence from the wider galaxy aside from the communication blackouts. Although a handful of Reaper destroyers were taken down over certain worlds, the Batarians were crushed, made all the easier through the extensive spread of indoctrination through the Leviathan of Dis, a Reaper corpse that the hegemony had seized decades prior, which led to most of Karsharn's planetary defences being shut down by their own forces, along with general disarray spreading as ships fired upon one another. With the few remaining ships of the Prothean fleet forced to flee, many of their worlds became the first to fuel the Reapers' efforts, while others had to sit by in deafening silence, waiting for the Reapers to arrive at their doorstep. The majority of Protheans that escaped ended up in Systems Alliance territories, such as the Exodus cluster, before later moving on to the Citadel. The sheer amount of Protheans passing through the mass relays connecting Hegemony and Alliance space was so great and unexpected that Alliance ships guarding the relays thought the Protheans had started their own war with humanity. Yet, they merely heralded the imminent Reaper expansion. Based on the layout of the mass relay network, the Reapers' next stop was humanity. Ignoring all but the most important worlds, the Reapers headed straight for Earth and the Sol system. At Octorus Station, Hackett and the 2nd, 3rd and 5th Alliance fleets, only one of which had been able to move to an optimal position for long-range engagements, fought only a dozen capital ship-sized Reapers and an unknown amount of Reaper destroyers, while the majority of the Reaper force continued to Earth. The first fleet had been positioned on the Sol side of the connecting mass relay, but suffered heavy losses and barely slowed down the Reapers. At Earth itself, even as some claimed that the massive fleet moving towards the planet wasn't cause for concern, the Reapers descended into the atmosphere, effortlessly pushing past the defensive 4th Fleet and believed to be led by Harbinger itself. Planet-side, the Reapers focused on immobilizing humanity rather than outright destruction, attempting to keep them contained in urban centers to make the creation of the new Reaper more efficient, continuing this approach throughout their occupation. Yet this still saw catastrophic levels of destruction, with the casualty rate already reaching the multi-million range by the end of the first week of the battle. Despite delivering crushing blows to humanity at Earth and Octorus Station, though, 3 key human figures were able to survive the Reaper onslaught. Firstly, Shepard and several others were able to escape Earth on board the Norman DSR-2. Secondly, Admiral Anderson was able to evade Reaper forces for long enough to meet up with and go on to lead resistance forces, initially consisting of other Systems Alliance personnel trapped on Earth, which would go on to become one of the most formidable forces on Reaper-occupied planets. And thirdly, Admiral Hackett was able to withdraw fleets from the Octorus battle, and would become the de facto leader of the Systems Alliance Navy, with his first action after the retreat being to order Shepard to Mars to investigate its status amid the chaos. However, these advantages would only begin to become clear as the wider fight against the Reapers continued, whereas the losses to humanity were felt immediately. They were still able to put up a fight, unlike the Protheans, but it was clear that their forces were a shadow of what they once were. At Octorus, for example, the Alliance 2nd Fleet had been ordered to cover the retreat of the other 2 fleets, and was destroyed down to the last ship. On Mars, Shepard, James Vega and Kaidan Alenko discovered the site had been taken over by Cerberus, with its forces seeming to be nearing the end of the initial battle to claim it and rounding up or chasing the stragglers. Once the trio entered the site, they discovered that one of these stragglers was Liara, who narrowly escaped a pair of Cerberus troopers before informing her old friends of her discoveries and the reason behind the Cerberus presence. A potential way to stop the Reapers had been discovered in the archives. Sending Vega back to the shuttle as a precaution, Shepard headed towards the facility's central chamber, fighting Cerberus at every step. On her way, she discovered Cerberus's method of entry, what seems to be a lone operative undercover as a scientist, along with the horrific effects of the implants used on their soldiers, leaving them one step away from husks. Once at the centre of the Prothean archive, Shepard was contacted by the Illusive man, who proclaimed his plans to use the data stored to take control of the Reapers, which acted as a distraction for the operative to take the necessary intel, only for it to be chased down by Shepard. The ensuing chase and subsequent destruction of its escape craft revealed that it was an advanced form of mech, rather than a living human, which managed to severely wound the Vermeer survivor before Shepard permanently disabled it. With Reapers entering the atmosphere, though, Shepard and the crew were forced to flee from the entire Sol system and head for the Citadel, briefing Hackett on the situation as they did so. Of the other Alliance forces that were able to escape the Reapers, half of the First Fleet had been wiped out before the retreat was given, and a tenth of its remaining ships had to be sacrificed to cover its retreat. Several lone capital ships of varying types would also be found scattered across the galaxy behind enemy lines and incorporated into the 3 main surviving fleets to rebuild their numbers. Despite their starting point, Reaper forces began to be sighted at various worlds across the outskirts of the galaxy, suggesting that they may have manoeuvred to encircle it while still in dark space in order to throw the various species off balance. On Ilium, for example, the Reapers found their efforts stalled when the planet's defenders focused on the Reapers' weaker, automated ships which carried the various amount of husked forms needed to sustain the planetary invasion, which forced the Reapers to redirect and reprioritise their own forces, but this would only delay the inevitable for the Asari world. Around the same time, the Taurians were beginning to feel the wrath of the Reapers. Defeated at their colony world of Tatras, the Taurians witnessed their counterattack force wiped out mere moments after the mass relay jump, and all other attempts to retake the planet failed. This then forced them onto the back foot much faster than all but a few thought possible, as they retreated to defend Palaven. With little time to prepare a defence, Taurian fleets flocked to their homeworld, with only a pair of carrier ships being stationed near the mass relay. Once the Reapers emerged, these two ships deployed every drone and unmanned starfighter they held to record as much data about their capabilities as possible before being wiped out. Using this to further plan their side of the battle, Taurian dreadnoughts commenced FTL jumps to land themselves between Reaper formations, where the latter's capabilities were limited by their weaknesses, only for Reaper destroyers to traverse the same distance to the orbit of Palaven as a counter, leaving the Taurians scrambling back to their homeworld and leaving the mass relay clear for Reaper reinforcements, before the Taurians eventually retreated to regroup. By the time the Normandy arrived at the Citadel, the other Council species were already looking for excuses to abandon Earth to its fate, stating the need to defend their own territories even when presented with the plans recovered from Mars. Behind closed doors, though, the Taurian councillor Sparatus, once the most sceptical about the Reaper threat, approached Shepard for assistance recovering Taurian Primarch Fedorian from one of Palaven's moons, a mission she reluctantly accepted. According to reports Udina had received, the Reapers had already destroyed all long-range communications on Earth, aside from quantum entanglement communicators, such as the one aboard the Normandy SR-2. Once word of the Reapers had reached the Citadel, the Ralloi, the newest species to join the galactic community, immediately abandoned the Citadel and destroyed any form of technology that would indicate they were a spacefaring species to try hiding from the Reapers. Whether this worked or if it merely made them an easier target became unknown to the rest of the galaxy as the war progressed. By the time that the Normandy arrived at Menet, the battles in the system had been ongoing for at least 2 days, and the Taurian navy was in the process of attempting to reclaim orbital supremacy of their own homeworld, only for their formations to be ripped apart by the Reapers. Once groundside, Shepard's mission became more complicated as the Taurians that she had been sent to find had fallen to the Reapers. Not only that, but the wide losses had left the otherwise extremely clear and straightforward lines of succession in shreds. Once communications to Palaven had been re-established, it was discovered that the next to take the position of Primarch was one of the officers fighting on Menet. Having reunited with Shepard, Garrus led her to the last location of Victus, recounting the state of the Taurians' war on the way, which was seeing similar levels of casualties as Earth was, as the Reapers had bombarded vast swaths of Palaven to crush resistance. Meanwhile on the Normandy, Edie had attempted to continue the search for the information taken by the mech on Mars, with the process causing malfunctions to spread to other areas of the ship, until she was able to destroy the hostile AI and take over control of the mech. Upon finding Victus, Shepard and Garrus convinced him to leave the immediate fight to lead his people, although on the condition to try bringing the Krogan into the war. From Victus's perspective, it was the only way to have a chance at salvaging the situation on Palaven, even if only on the ground. Unlike with Karshan and Earth, the fight was merely viewed as having moved to groundside instead of being a complete fool, as the vast majority of Taurians were well versed in the life of a soldier due to the hierarchy structure, although fighting at a severe disadvantage since the Reapers had reportedly begun to occupy the majority of the planet. Meanwhile, several other planets in the cluster were faced with stalemates, being held by forces that could have otherwise been used to defend Palaven while facing smaller-scale Reaper attacks. In Asari space, the Reapers began to be sighted in the Selene Nebula and Nimbus cluster, more locations on the border of the galaxy. Due to the initial tactic of performing hit-and-runs against Reaper forces, Asari fleets were able to limit their losses, but were in even less of a position to stop the Reapers advancing through their territories, with this approach only acting as a diversion for the Reapers when they eventually reached Thessia. With the war summit delayed, Shepard set about investigating a series of Cerberus incursions. The largest scale of these was the occupation of Eden Prime, which Cerberus had launched around the same time the Reapers began to expand beyond the Batarian space. Having subdued its defenders and shipping most of its combat-fit inhabitants to be integrated into Cerberus's forces, only a small-scale resistance was able to oppose them as they focused their efforts around a new Prothean artifact. By the time Shepard and Liara made their investigation, they discovered that it wasn't simply an artifact, but an occupied and operational Prothean stasis pod. With the Prothean cipher, Shepard was able to discover how to release the Prothean from the stasis pod. A commander of the Prothean Empire named Javik, the occupant was unaware of anything about the Crucible aside from the fact that his species' attempts to complete it had failed, but with more experience fighting Reapers than even Shepard, he still committed himself to the fight and to the Normandy's crew. Along with this, Cerberus intel discovered by Shepard was passed to Eden Prime's resistance movement using Liara's Shadow Broker resources, and they were able to drive Cerberus into retreat. Unfortunately, the victories at Eden Prime were isolated ones compared to the wider state of the conflict, as the Systems Alliance was forced to withdraw from system after system, and in some cases entire clusters, with the Hades Gamma cluster becoming a staging point for further Reaper attacks. Aside from rare examples like the colony of Ukbar, which was fully evacuated in under an hour with the aid of only a single Systems Alliance cruiser, the Reapers were beginning to take over colonies faster than they could be evacuated. Whether to even stay and attempt to hold colonies in the Exodus cluster quickly became a debate, despite a comparatively small Reaper presence compared to other worlds, as Hackett had ordered the 6th Fleet, one of the fleets active in the cluster, to avoid contact with Reaper forces at all costs as a reserve force, as they retreated from Terra Nova and surrounding planets. In the nearby Petra Nebula, Shepard investigated a distress call answered by a signal similar to the one that she had followed into a trap aboard a collector cruiser. Encountering Cerberus during raid on the Systems Alliance site Grissom Academy, aiding Kaylee Sanders and Jack, an old friend of Anderson and Shepard respectively, the Normandy's crew were able to rescue the biotics of the Ascension Project, who would go on to provide biotic support for troops fighting in some of the toughest battles against the Reapers. Over in the Terminus systems, Shepard raided a Cerberus lab on Sanctum with the objective of retrieving small-scale Reaper tech, along with finding personnel logs referring to the processing that Cerberus troops were forced through. After Shepard left the planet, Hackett would keep up the pressure against the Cerberus site as one of many locations targeted by newly emerging N7 teams. Although only a few were official N7s like Shepard, these squads acted as multi-species teams that conducted rapid missions against Cerberus and Reaper forces, and would see some of the most common successes throughout the Reaper War, consisting both of the best and the unconventional. With these missions complete, though, Shepard now had to turn her attention to playing diplomat.
Shepard, get that second hammer going!
There's no space for any Rex!
I know, you get all the fun.
Once the reshuffle of the species that would attend the War Summit was complete, and those present met near Surkesh, the Normandy became neutral ground to discuss Krogan involvement. With one of Shepard's old friends from the Normandy SR1, Urdnot Rex, representing the Krogan, Shepard already had a hypothetical majority on her side, and Rex's initial terms were simple. If he were to throw the Krogan clans against the Reapers, then he expected the Genophage to be cured, which was met with an immediate counter by Solarian Delatras Lindwan, only for her to be aggressively outvoted by Shepard and Victus, who forced her to reluctantly greenlight a mission to recover Krogan females involved in a previous attempt to cure it. Rex's mere presence at the summit was likely based out of pragmatism for the bigger picture, with advanced forces of Reapers having landed on Tuchanka in scouting actions, as cited by some of the other clans. Once planetside, a seemingly simple pickup turned into a pitched battle, not against the Reapers but instead Cerberus. Theorised by Mordin to have been assisted by an indoctrinated member of the base's personnel, their objective was believed to destroy the alliance between the Taurians and Krogan before it could even begin. But they were narrowly defeated. With Rex demanding that the cure be implemented before he would mobilise any Krogan, he and Victus both brought up their own issues that required Shepard's personal attention, while they used the Normandy as a mobile base to coordinate their respective forces. In an unknown region of the galaxy, several of the Systems Alliance fleets had regrouped with Hackett as the construction of the Prothean device discovered by Liara began to accelerate, being labelled Project Crucible, with its progress being connected to the Normandy's war room. Even this early into the conflict, Liara was setting up precautions in the event that their efforts failed, preparing a series of data packs on the Normandy about the Reapers, the Crucible, and the various civilizations of the current cycle that would later be deployed to various worlds, where at least some would remain hidden from the Reapers. Initially occupied by the Reapers around the same time as Earth, the human colony of Benning began seeing attacks from Cerberus. After the initial squads that were sent in response were faced with failure and forced to withdraw, Hackett sent Shepard to establish a foothold for further N7 teams to be deployed to the planet to aid the Octora's 1st Division in their attempts to liberate the planet from the Reapers and Cerberus. Reaching Tuchanka, Shepard used the time waiting for the genophage cure's development to investigate a downed Taurian ship Victus had referenced. After rescuing the remaining Taurians, led by Victus's son, Shepard discovered that their mission was to secure and disable a contingency device planted on Tuchanka at the end of the Krogan rebellions, as a backup in the event that the genophage failed. This device caught the interest of Cerberus, which deployed a sizable force in an attempt to use it, along with deploying another unit to an ancient Krogan cannon system with the likely intention of using it as a staging point to aid the main force. With these skirmishes won by Shepard's squad, the genophage cure had become viable to use. The only question was how to deploy it. Briefly running through the options, Mordin Solus quickly realised that the only viable option was the shroud facility that had originally spread the genophage. Nearing the site, though, Shepard was faced with two hurdles: a Reaper blocking the path, and the Dalatras suggesting that Shepard sabotage the cure in exchange for Salarian support. Due to being unable to mobilise the Krogan fast enough, the initial plan to distract the Reaper failed, leaving the Taurian Starfighter Wing fighting the Reaper alone. After Shepard navigated her way through an underground Krogan city, Eve, the Krogan female key to the genophage cure, formed the idea to draw Kalos, the mother of all Thrushmores in Krogan society, to the Reaper. Following advice from her and Rex, Shepard's squad was forced to narrowly dodge the Reaper to summon the Thrushmore, which swarmed it and was eventually able to bring it down while Mordin completed the cure. However, by the time Shepard reunited with him, he needed to go up to the shroud itself to disable the countermeasures that would have rendered the cure inoperable had Shepard sided with the Dalatras, an act that would become Mordin's sacrifice as the shroud crumbled around him. With that, the Krogan were freed from a curse that had plagued them in countless ways for over 1,000 years, and Rex was more than willing to start sending Krogan to the fight, with the promise to be there for Shepard when the time was right. Before returning to Palaven, Victus made similar promises and dedicated the Taurian 7th Fleet to help defend the Crucible's construction. After Shepard defied her, the Dalatras held back most of the Salarian Union's forces, and those that were formally ordered to fight merely prioritised defending access routes to Salarian space, such as a skirmish near Novaria after Shepard had taken out a Cerberus fighter base. But even these were rare, as some Salarians had been strongly opposed to the idea of aiding any other species early into the conflict, even the fellow members of the Citadel Council. Aside from that, all that the wider galaxy would be given for the fight were the several Salarian operatives that placed pragmatism over the short-sighted arrogance of those that chose to stay out of the fight. Back on Earth, meanwhile, the Reapers' occupation was secure enough that they had begun to move in and construct hundreds of what the galaxy termed processor ships, similar in function to devices found at the collector base by Shepard, but intended for long-term storage instead of being used to full and under-construction Reaper core. These ships alone led to over 1 million human casualties each day. Aside from those able to actively avoid Reaper hotspots like Anderson's forces, indoctrination was also starting to kick in, making it even easier for the Reapers to control those trapped on Earth.
Cerberus took out the shuttle. Everyone back to the elevator. Move! Shepard, what's going on?
Up to this point, the Reapers had ignored the Citadel, which combined with its location to keep it largely unaffected across most of the station, aside from the areas assigned for refugees fleeing the Reapers. This safe haven status made it crucial for Shepard's efforts to build up her forces whenever she returned to the Citadel, forming alliances through old associates, passing resources to those in need of them, and aiding another Spectre in protecting the Hanar homeworld from indoctrinated agents, along with visiting Kaidan during his recovery and learning of him becoming the second human Spectre. However, with the Genophage cured, this was about to change. Likely due to feeling powerless to influence the direction of the Citadel's response to the Reapers, Udina began to turn to other possibilities and became a tenuous ally to the Illusive Man, which led to a large-scale Cerberus assault on the Citadel. Initially intending to simply take sole leadership of the Citadel forces and send them to fight the Reapers at Earth, Udina's plans began to unravel once high-level members of the Citadel's leadership heard rumours about it. With Solarian Councillor Valern contacting Shepard for assistance with investigating Udina, Cerberus saw Udina's initial plan as being at risk and launched the full-scale attack led by Kai Leng. By the time Shepard returned to the Citadel, the battle was in full swing with Cerberus holding a distinct advantage. Turning the tide, Shepard made her way through the Presidium before eventually encountering Kai Leng. Here she discovered the basics of Udina's plan from Valern, whose life was narrowly saved by Thane Krios, a former squadmate of Shepard, who had also alerted her to the assault on the station. Unfortunately, in the ensuing fight with Kai Leng, Thane would be slain by the Cerberus assassin. With Kai Leng's initial attempt foiled, old Shepard chased him further across the Presidium as both fought towards the rest of the Citadel Council, under the protection of Kaidan Alenko. Needing to first talk down Kaidan, Shepard was able to stop Udina, after which Cerberus almost immediately retreated from the space station and through the Keeper tunnels. While debriefing the situation with Anderson and Tackett on board the Normandy, Shepard learned that the Crucible was roughly 50% complete, and that the Reapers on Earth had started to coordinate their efforts around London, in turn giving Anderson a place to focus his efforts. Alongside this, Hackett mobilised the most elite teams active in the galaxy in limited-scale missions to slip past Reaper defences to provide aid to Anderson's forces from that point onwards, with one such mission resulting in a Reaper destroyer being disabled and salvaged for intel. Lingering on the Citadel afterwards, Shepard investigated a potential information leak among the Taurian hierarchy, being able to convince the Volus diplomat responsible to both give up the information he had leaked to Cerberus about the Taurian colony of Aphis, and to dedicate Volus forces to the cause with the help of Zaid Masani, a mercenary hired for the attack on the Collectors. Around the same time, Shepard was also able to convince the last of the Praetorian fleets to put aside their old grudges and hatred of humanity in favour of joining them to fight the Reapers. On the Praetorian side, a clear sign of self-preservation. Elsewhere in the galaxy, the human colonies of Zoo's Hope on Feros, Elysium, and Tiptree fell to the Reapers after smaller-scale incursions, including the deployment of an Asari Huntress unit to Tiptree and the survivors of Seren's attack on Feros fighting together as a small-scale yet extremely effective army, leading to the large-scale evacuation of the latter. 2 weeks after this, Thessia would be considered lost. Now that the Citadel had been resecured, Shepard investigated a lead mentioned by Rex on board the Normandy, potential activity from the Rachni, with encounters against Reaper-modified Rachni on Tuchanka increasing the urgency for such intel. The Krogan forces sent ahead to meet Shepard and to search for the missing scouts were a recently formed elite unit called Arlak Company, and were led by Grunt, a pure Krogan clone that Shepard had helped to be accepted into Clan Urdnot while fighting the Collectors. Having fallen into a large cave system shortly after they landed on Utuku, Shepard's team quickly discovered that the Reapers were creating an army of Rachni warriors that would then be turned into Ravagers, heavy artillery units for the war against the wider galaxy, and had placed a sufficiently large force of Husk types to protect their efforts. This was made all the more crucial as a result of what Shepard discovered at the centre of the cave system. The Rachni Queen that she had released on Novarian during the hunt for Saren several years prior. Due to a rare rejection of indoctrination, the Rachni Queen had been imprisoned and stated that it could still fight the Reapers if freed, but it was too weak and injured to flee without help, forcing Shepard to order the Krogan that had followed her into the cave system to hold the Reaper forces back to allow it to escape. As had already been proven, old hatreds needed to be cast aside if the galaxy had any hopes of making a successful stand against the Reapers. Aside from Grunt, who dragged himself out of the caves before collapsing, every Krogan that had fought on the planet fell. And even though Arlak Company would later be reconstructed and may have had units deployed elsewhere at the time, a massive chunk of its most skilled fighters had been lost. For the Rachni's part, they lived up to their assurances and would begin to help building the Crucible. On the other side of the galaxy, Shepard took the Normandy to a distant Asari colony that had seemingly been important enough for the Asari to send some of their best troops to defend it, with none returning. At an isolated location on the planet, Shepard encountered another old squadmate, Samara, and shortly after fought several Banshees, a form of husk that had rarely been sighted up to that point, and created from Asari with powerful biotic capabilities for a variety of reasons. With no other choice, Shepard levelled the entire site using ordnance brought by the Asari, and had to save Samara so she could fight the Reapers. Although their code was surprisingly flexible regarding how to respond to an enemy such as the Reapers, Samara believed that most Asari Justicars would return to Thessia in an attempt to hold it as the Reapers focused more heavily on the Asari front, along with acknowledging the possibility that the wider war would be devastating enough to see the end of the Justicars, even if the Reapers were defeated. Following a lead found by Traynor, Shepard discovered a hideout in the Minos wastelands used by scientists that had defected from Cerberus. Aside from Jacob Taylor, one of the operatives assigned to the Normandy SR2 during its initial service fighting the Collectors, there were few fighters to defend them when Cerberus tracked them down. Clearing out the attacking Cerberus squads, Shepard was introduced to the leader of those Jacob had been protecting, who explained that the majority of those that fled had been involved in studying what had been recovered from the Collector base. Even in the face of relentless attacks from Cerberus, Shepard was able to coordinate the defectors fast enough to successfully evacuate them all. Alongside this large group, many former Cerberus personnel that hadn't been indoctrinated had begun to defect to the Systems Alliance. An elite Cerberus operative whose indoctrination had failed would go on to defect upon seeing firsthand what Cerberus was willing to do to its own personnel, while a handful of biotics from Cerberus's Project Phoenix would do so during the early stages of its use of indoctrination, continuing to wear the armour of those that they had turned against as a demonstration of their defiance.
I've seen what you can do. The war needs you.
There is no war. There is only the harvest.
Several weeks into the Reaper War, Hackett requested for Shepard to meet with a Systems Alliance researcher, Dr. Garrick Bryson, head of Task Force Aurora and in charge of investigating anything that could be found about the Reapers, fact or fiction, after his team had reached a potential breakthrough. However, shortly after Shepard met up with him, an artifact inflicted one of the team with an effect similar to indoctrination, which placed Shepard at step 1 with little help after the assistant killed Bryson. Putting together what few clues could be found, Shepard and ED found a path that led them on a chase across various distant locations across the galaxy, following up on their leads whenever the war gave them a chance to breathe. This journey ended at an ocean world that held the last of the Leviathans, the ancient race responsible for creating the Reapers. After a conversation with Shepard, they chose to join the fight for the first time in what must have been at least millions of years, but only with the intention of re-establishing their original place at the top of the galaxy. Afterwards, they allowed for their enthrallment devices to be turned against a variety of Reaper husks. Unfortunately, with the concern that the Reapers would find a way to counter it, and how late into the war Leviathan was eventually found, these artifacts saw little use. In the wider galaxy, reports of collector ships separate from the Reapers were discovered as they began entering the galaxy as a second wave of sorts, also bringing back some of the unique horrors Shepard had to face when fighting them. While the Reapers commanding these collectors were capable of assuming direct control, like Sovereign and Harbinger had done, the downsides of this approach that had led to Sovereign's demise had been eliminated, and the ability itself had expanded beyond the collectors and to the regular husks alongside them. However, not only did Shepard's experiences make those fighting them better prepared, but a handful of collectors would also be turned against the Reapers by Leviathan's enthrallment devices. The collectors that survived this process would go on to be termed as awakened collector adepts, which began to fight with the same ferocity as the Protheans. On a more straightforward diversion, Shepard teamed up with Arya once her plan to retake Omega Station was ready to be enacted. Besieging the space station, Arya rapidly landed her mercenary army to establish a foothold, from which she brought together those left behind, such as an old associate, Nyreen Kandros, who had been leading the Talons as part of a resistance group. Initially, the battles consisted of small-scale skirmishes involving Arya, Shepard and Nyreen, followed by Cerberus counter-attacks. However, once Shepard disabled the shield walls set up by Cerberus, the entire station rose up against their occupiers. This reckless straightforwardness may have resulted in high losses, including Nyreen when she took out the last of the adjutant husks, but it did ultimately retake Arya's home, its resources given over to Shepard's cause. Although Arya was forced to return to the Citadel regularly for the sake of coordinating all of her resources, while the Talons acted as a security force to honour Nyreen's memory. Along with a handful of Talons joining the wider fight, Arya's fleet was dedicated to Hackett's cause, initially saving an Alliance fleet it had been sent to rendezvous with from a Reaper attack, and later going on to establish a reputation against Cerberus forces. With resources gathered to bolster the pre-existing fleets, Shepard turned her attention to getting them reinforcements, sending the Normandy towards the Perseus Vale.
They're doing fine. You're the ones who should worry. Tell your friends we're coming for them. Never mind. I'll tell them myself.
With the continuingly rising toll on the Taurian navy, Hackett ordered Shepard to the Perseus Vale after the Quarian migrant fleet opened negotiations. Upon meeting up with the Quarian Admiralty Board, though, Shepard was informed of why they had seemingly disappeared early into the conflict. 17 days prior, the migrant fleet had launched an offensive of their own with the intention of retaking Rannoch. Initially they were successful through countermeasures developed by Admiral Zen, which crippled the Geth fleets, starting with strikes against 4 Geth worlds, likely including Haestrom given its use as the meeting point, making their way to the home system and destroying the Dyson Sphere-type structure that the Geth consensus had been constructing. As they made their approach to the planet itself, an unknown signal activated which immediately increased the Geth's overall effectiveness. As a result, the migrant fleet became entrapped between Rannoch and the Geth, led by an enormous Geth dreadnought which they had barely been able to scratch in exchange for the loss of multiple frigates. With all this information, the implications became obvious. The Quarians had only offered to negotiate because they had gotten themselves in over their heads and were at risk of losing everything for the first time since they had fled during the Morning War. Teaming up with Tally, Shepard set out to board and destroy the Geth dreadnought, which was also housing the signal improving the Geth. During the space battle, Admiral Corus was shot down by an orbital cannon on Rannoch, using what little control of the ship his crew still had to destroy it to limit further Quarian losses. Progressing to the source of the signal, Shepard discovered that it was being transmitted through Legion as a signal booster who had been shackled to the ship. Fortunately, the process to disable the shackles was relatively easy, and afterwards Legion deactivated most of the ship's systems as a sign of good faith. However, instead of using the opportunity to escape, Admiral Gerrel pushed forward to destroy the ship without bothering to confirm whether Shepard and Tally had made it to safety, with Shepard's team narrowly escaping in a Geth starfighter. Although the initial signal was disabled, a backup on Rannoch itself was activated, leaving the Quarians trapped, although with enough time to retreat to the temporary safety on the other side of the system's star. While Legion used its processing power to find the Geth base transmitting the signal, Shepard prepared to go planet-side. To begin with, Shepard and Legion entered a Geth outpost to disable starfighter waves to give the Quarians more time until Shepard could move her attention to finding Corus. While Shepard interfaced with a portion of the Geth consensus, Legion convinced the programs that had been serving in the starfighters to side against the Reapers, which then downloaded themselves into Geth Prime mobile platforms to exit the outpost, remaining planetside until the hostilities could end. On the other side of the galaxy, meanwhile, things had begun to turn around in favour of the Taurians as the Krogan began to pour in as reinforcements, even claiming a sweeping victory on Palaven. In what became known to the galaxy as the Miracle at Palaven, the Taurians were able to draw multiple Reaper capital ships away from Palaven's orbit to give room for transports carrying the first wave of Krogan to deploy to the surface. As the initial Reaper response was limited to collectors and husks, The Krogan had little trouble making their way to Taurian rally points and passing heavy supplies to Taurian forces, which were then able to make their way to Reaper ships of all types across the planet and destroy them. With the combination of this distraction and the reinforcements, the joint Taurian and Krogan forces were able to retake territory en masse. Although Vixus and Garrus would later describe the Krogan involvement as only being able to slow the Reapers down. Back on Rannoch, the rescue of Chorus had been able to unify the civilian ships within the Quarian fleet, just as the source of the signal had been located. To deal with it, Shepard needed to paint a target on the exact point for the Normandy to hit it in a precision strike, while the migrant fleet began to engage the Geth again, when Shepard discovered that the signal was being generated by another Reaper destroyer. Initially fleeing from it, Shepard ordered for the targeting device to be linked to every remaining Quarian ship to coordinate fire from them, eventually bringing down the Reaper. Once it had been dealt with, Shepard was faced with another dilemma when Legion suggested the idea of uploading the Reaper code used to enhance the Geth, although it would almost certainly have had the impact of wiping out the Quarians, which had immediately returned to targeting the Geth fleet. However, Shepard, with the aid of Talia and Chorus, was able to talk down the species mere moments before the upload was completed. With this show of faith from the Quarians, the Geth stood down as well, starting a process of coexistence and bringing both sides to fight the Reapers. The Quarians mainly used their fleets to provide for support and evacuation for the Taurians, while the Geth focused on the slowly expanding Reaper supply lines. Although very small scale, likely even smaller than the amount of Geth heretics that joined Sovereign, there were still fights involving hostile Geth, which theorised to be mobile platforms uploaded with Reaper code.
Well, what happens on shore leave stays on shore leave.
Come on, maybe we can take some actual time off. No explosions or anything. Just us.
Don't know about no explosions, but just us sounds perfect.
With the crew's morale up, and no immediate concerns, Shepard took the time to return the Normandy to the Citadel for a full repair, on the orders of Admiral Hackett, to make sure that it was at its best for the sake of the war effort. Also being given access to an apartment once belonging to Anderson, it wasn't long before even here Shepard found trouble, as she soon learns of yet another plot against her. According to a low-level Alliance officer, Maya Brooks, someone was trying to take over Shepard's identity, just as a squad of mercs burst in to try killing her. After regrouping with her squad, Shepard's attempts to stop the incident led her to the Citadel archives, and the discovery that the Cat-6 mercs trying to take her down were being led by a clone of Shepard. While chasing down the clone, she also discovered that Brooks was one of the masterminds behind the plot. Forced to fight to retake the Normandy, Shepard took down the Pretender and dealt with the betrayer when the latter tried to escape. Although Brooks claimed not to be indoctrinated, her plan would have played to the Reaper's advantage regardless of whether she was or not, since, at least as far as she and the false Shepard elaborated, they didn't seem to have much of a plan to stop the Reapers beyond simply flying around the galaxy while spacefaring civilization crumbled. With the incident over, Shepard and the squad began to enjoy their shore leave, with Shepard also meeting up with several of her former squadmates that had been unable to rejoin the Normandy. Later on, Shepard would return to the apartment to throw a party for all her squadmates, past and present, on the night before the Allied forces set out against Cerberus, the last time that many of Shepard's friends would see her or each other in person. However, once the repairs were complete and shore leave ended, the crew of the Normandy was straight back to the fight, just as it was reaching its darkest point.
The Shrike Abyssal, Celia Nebula, Ethon Cluster, Hades Gamma, all in trouble. We're losing the galaxy fast, Shepard.
By this point of the Reaper War, the Reapers were present in over half of the inhabited galaxy to varying extents, with the Maroon Sea, Armstrong Nebula, and Nubian Expanse being the next human territories to fall, leaving much of the east side of the Attican Traverse to the Reapers. While not insurmountable, the Reapers were also suffering their own setbacks. Although Irune was based around connecting its settlements for easy trade, the Taurian hierarchy and the Krogan fought extensively to keep the Reapers from fully claiming it. On Dakuna, the Reapers were slowed down in their harvesting attempts simply through the way that Elcor society was structured, which left many of the species spread out across the planet rather than enclustered in urban centres. With the Vulture, the Reapers merely chose to contain them to their homeworld and prevent them from joining the wider fight due to their resilience and on-the-fly adaptation, making them both extremely effective fighters and extremely difficult to pin down in the same ways that other species could be. However, this approach of containment only worked on Vulture on Heshtok, whereas those in the wider galaxy had no such issues committing themselves to the cause. As conventional methods did little to stop the Reapers, strategists from various species were forced to find various, often failed alternative possibilities to fight the Reapers. Two significant but quickly rejected tactics were the use of ships as battering rams and the destruction of mass relays. The former was almost immediately ruled a failure due to safeguards too intrinsically linked to FTL drives to be disabled. That would prevent such attempts, along with the possibility that the Reapers, the ones responsible for the origin point of FTL technology, could use their own capabilities to nullify such a plan. On the other hand, the latter was ruled out due to the system-wide devastation that followed the destruction of the Alpha Relay, and how such a move would only slow down the Reapers as a whole, in turn inflicting higher damage on the allied species than on the Reapers. From helping Shepard on Psion to containing Seeker Swarm outbreaks in the Terminus systems, the N7 teams continued to fight across the galaxy and prove their worth, with their numbers beginning to incorporate even more unconventional fighters. One such example was the Alliance Infiltration Unit, an AI based on the mech design encountered by Shepard on Mars, replicated by the Systems Alliance. Unfortunately, wider implementation of cross-species tactics had much more mixed outcomes, made all the worse by the logistical nightmare of trying to match together so many different species and equipment. Although it did seem like at times that the procurement branches were actively siding with the Reapers.
Well, the Grawl 7 is one of the best heavy shotguns available. We don't just give them to anyone.
I don't use shotguns ever.
While most planets were targeted for harvesting by the Reapers, some were destroyed entirely. Done so for either strategic reasons, such as planets with heavy anti-orbital defences, or for mere expediency, with planets that were deemed too low in population for harvesting. On some Asari planets, the inhabitants fled the major areas before the Reapers could land, and performed guerrilla operations against them, much like their fleets were doing in space. Unfortunately, Thessia was deemed too important for this strategy to work, with the Asari being pushed back at every turn as the Reapers landed and began harvesting.
The Reapers have it right? You're indoctrinated. You're doing just what they want.
I could say the same of you. Wasting time on a war that can't be won.
As the Reapers began focusing their efforts on Thessia, Asari Councillor Tevos approached Shepard with intel regarding the potential solution to finding the catalyst, a missing component of the Crucible that was one of the key reasons why the Protheans had been unable to use it. With the artifact in question located on Thessia, she had only brought it to Shepard's attention because of how unstoppable the Reapers seemed. Despite the centuries of skill carried by their most renowned units, the Asari were outmatched both in the space and on the ground, as their species-wide biotics were hindered by how small their armies were. Witnessing this herself as the Normandy approached Thessia, Liara demanded to be part of the squad deploying to the planet. Also bringing Javik in the hopes that his presence would catch anything the others missed, Shepard's team were faced with an enemy push almost as soon as they landed. Shepard and her team were forced to advance on their own, with only the occasional support of squads they encountered on their way, with the heaviest fighting being on the approach to the location they had been given. While attempting to find the correct artifact, the squad eventually found a Prothean beacon, with Javik starting its activation. Unfortunately, before the Prothean VI could reveal what was needed to complete the Crucible, its security systems shut it down upon detecting the mental patterns of indoctrination. Having discovered the site from the data recovered from Mars, the Illusive man had sent Kaileng to Thessia to retrieve the beacon. After being relentlessly and hilariously trolled in combat by Shepard,
You're slower than I imagined. I've been hit!
He resorted to cheating by getting his ship to trigger a collapse to distract Shepard's squad long enough to transfer the data to his Omni tool. Unable to stop him as he left, Shepard could do nothing more but watch as Reaper reinforcements landed and the Asari were forced into full retreat. Learning of this defeat from Shepard, the Asari Council was forced to put into place plans for the continuity of civilization, as she termed it, likely including needing to erase all data on the Andromeda Initiative, as it appeared to be the only way that the modern species would have any form of survival. The Asari were not the only Council species suffering severe setbacks. Despite having gained logistical support from the Quarians and groundside aid from the Krogan, Taurian losses were still too great, and during the Battle of Thessia, Garrus had advised Victus to make the difficult decision to stop all offensive actions against the Reapers, done with the intention of making sure that they had any ships left for the fight to retake Earth and use the Crucible. Back on the Normandy, Shepard's only lead was that Kai Leng had been tracked through the mass relay network until he disappeared near Horizon. Meanwhile, Miranda was already on the planet investigating Sanctuary after discovering its links to her father. At the same time, the Illusive Man had sent Kai Leng and a Cerberus force there to secure the facility after the Reapers had turned on them. Once Shepard made it to Sanctuary, Cerberus was retreating. Inside of the facility, Shepard found the remains of a fight between the Reapers and Cerberus before encountering messages from Miranda warning people to stay away from Sanctuary and discovering repurposed Reaper tech. Soon, she also found the truth of the site. Along with experimenting on husks from a wide range of species, many of the humans that had fled to Sanctuary had been forced through the integration process and turned into mindless Cerberus troops, explaining how they had been able to keep up a fresh supply of forces no matter how many they had thrown at the galaxy. On top of that, a level of success had been found in controlling husks, with records showing that the Illusive Man had intentions of expanding the research to take over actual Reapers. This was seemingly something that the Reapers believed to be possible, given how swiftly they moved to stop Cerberus. As both sides abandoned the planet, Shepard shut down the communication blocks and warned the galaxy of the truth about Sanctuary. Having met up with Shepard, Miranda also revealed that she had planted a tracking device on Kai Leng's ship before he left, having narrowly escaped an encounter with him. Upon her recovery, Miranda would also begin hitting several Cerberus sites alongside other defectors. With the Reapers now having no use for them, the heavy losses suffered by Cerberus meant that they had little time left in the conflict. Their last offensive was aimed at a Systems Alliance site on Ontarom, which was repelled by Shepard, with other N7s helping push back Reaper attacks alongside the Systems Alliance 8th Fleet. Now that they knew where to fight Cerberus, Hackett advised Shepard that if they were to fully remove them from the conflict, the Reapers would know of their intentions, and by extension, they would need to deploy the Crucible almost immediately afterwards. The tracking device on Kai Leng's ship led to a system in the Horsehead Nebula, where Hackett personally led the force that attacked Chrono Station, while Shepard searched it for the Prothean data. As they neared the centre of the space station with ED for technical support, Shepard's squad fought through a chamber holding what little could be salvaged from the human Reaper, with the centrepiece being the power core. When they found their objective, Shepard once again spoke with the Illusive Man, who was curiously absent from the space station, learnt that the missing piece of the Crucible was the Citadel, and was confronted by Kai Leng. Having discovered the same information about the Citadel from the Illusive Man, the Reapers moved to claim it and repositioned it above Earth, along with briefly bombarding the nearby planets in the Citadel's nebula, such as Beckenstein. As Alliance forces left Chrono Station, technicians removed the Reaper core in the hopes that it could be used as an alternative power source for the Crucible. With this revelation, the Allied species had no other option than to focus their efforts at Earth. Had the situation been different, Shepard's Allied forces could have hypothetically been sent against any significant planet to distract the Reapers, and such a decision could have become slowed by the same form of self-interest and squabbling that had caused such ineffective responses to the Reapers in the first place. Now, though, the only chance for success was for the newly unified galaxy to follow Shepard and Hackett, especially with the Reapers pushing against every front with greater intensity than ever before. Even previously uncontested planets like Surkesh were close to falling. Taking the unit's designated Sword Fleet, the majority of the space-based forces that had been gathered, and Hammer, all of the ground-based forces, and likely a handful of support craft, Shepard led the galaxy to Earth, while Hackett waited with Shield fleets defending the Crucible. With momentum on their side, the Allied fleets were able to push back the Reapers for long enough to deploy the advanced waves of Hammer's ground teams to the surface of Earth. Shutting down the Reapers' Hades cannons, preventing large-scale landings, the ground forces rendezvoused with Anderson and Earth's resistance in London. Even then, the Reapers were inflicting devastating losses on most of the scattered outposts along with the dropships, with only half of Hammer making it to the central forward operating base, with the rest either landing across the wider area, like many of Shepard's old squadmates, or were entirely wiped out. In short, the situation was desperate. Around the base, though, emotions were mixed, with some such as Garrison Javik already preparing for life after the Reapers, while Rex viewed Shepard's ability to bring the galaxy together as a victory in itself. Once the full attack to reclaim the Citadel occurred, the battle was fierce and saw the majority of the main force wiped out, while even Shepard's squad was pushed to the limit, narrowly bringing down the Reaper destroyer guarding the conduit beam with Thanix missiles. During the final race to the beam, Shepard's squad were gravely injured and needed to be evacuated from the ground battle, with Shepard staying behind mere moments before it was believed to have failed by a Reaper counterattack. With the Crucible already en route, most of the remaining ships moved to protect it, with Hackett receiving word that the attempt had narrowly succeeded. What happened next was likely never known for certain by the wider galaxy, but someone, assumed by most present at the battle to be Shepard, was able to disengage the Citadel's lockdown procedure and allow the Crucible to connect. At first, nothing happened, and Hackett had little option other than to hold position while it seemed as if the galaxy had gambled and lost on the Crucible plan. Eventually, after minutes that must have felt like an eternity for those involved, a massive build-up of energy was detected as the Crucible activated. As a precaution, Hackett ordered all remaining ships to jump to FTL out of the immediate range as the Crucible's energy began to spread across Earth. On Palaven, Earth, Thessia, Tuchanka, and dozens of other fronts across the galaxy, soldiers left to man the defences and keep the Reapers occupied fought bravely. Having been sent across the mass relay network, the Crucible's power began to strike planets across the entire galaxy. Reapers began to shut down and to collapse, husks were vaporised by the energy, and the sounds of battle fell quiet, replaced by the cheers and celebration from those that had just been fighting them. What had seemed like countless numbers of hopeless fights moments before had just become a singular victory that swept across the galaxy. In the following days, several of the ships from the battle slowly returned to Earth to regroup with those left on the planet, while Hackett spoke of what had been sacrificed for the victory, and how it had been won by every species, every being in the galaxy. While this was true, with every species having contributed something to the battle to save Earth, whether it be entire fleets or a small handful of troops, it couldn't encompass the enormous truth that hid behind that statement. The victory wasn't one simply attained by the modern species, nor the Protheans that had stalled the Reapers, those who had initially formed the plans for the first iteration of the Crucible, attempted to construct it, and concealed the plans when they failed, then each of the following cycles that repeated the process, trying, failing, and preserving the plans in the hopes that their successors would be able to complete it, or at least complete the stages they had. Now, those hopes had been fulfilled, and the galaxy could finally enter a new age, one free from the threat of the Reapers. Although the details were unknown, the galaxy began to slowly rebuild, seemingly within the lifetime of most of Shepard's old allies, with Rex, Grunt, and all the Krogan that were present on Earth returning to a hero's welcome on a Tuchanka in the process of rebuilding itself. Meanwhile, on an unknown jungle planet where the Normandy had crashed, Shepard's squad and crew held a memorial for those lost before leaving the planet, but they stopped themselves from placing Shepard's name on the memorial wall. After all, they could have been wrong. It wouldn't have been the first time Shepard returned from the dead. As the centuries rolled onwards, the Asari, Krogan, and Geth became the only species that still had those who could remember what it was like to fight mockeries of the galaxy species. the fear that accompanied hearing the sound of Reaper horns. With this, there was the inevitable concern whether records of the Reapers alone would be enough to convey their threat, or if the curious, power-hungry, or insane would seek out the distant worlds where Reaper ships remained in ruins, and fall under indoctrination, in turn reawakening the nightmare. Yet there was the more immediate concern that, as the galactic civilization continued to rebuild, it would begin to fracture under the strain. Reports of the Krogan beginning to mobilise on a scale not seen since they fought the Reapers. Rumours of Liara returning to sites of old battles, and sightings of new agents carrying the mark of N7 searching across desolate worlds made it seem like the galaxy itself was moving back to a point where a single being, whether they were someone adept in the arts of biotics or an expert engineer, a stalwart soldier or a watchful sentinel, a precise infiltrator or a quick-on-the-draw vanguard, could shape its course just as Shepard had during the time of the Reapers.